Thank you all for joining us tonight for this discussion. My name is Aisha Ford, and we are excited to bring you the perspectives of a few intelligent men and women who share a commitment to improve our communities. Just to let you know how quickly this came about, a couple of weeks ago, my friends Bakia Parrish, who is a producer of this show, and Finda Hillman, moderator, and I held a social distancing event. It was after the Ahmaud Arbery case came to light, and I was so devastated by yet another senseless killing of a young Black man for literally no reason. The outrage was palpable as always, yet somehow after each tragedy, we get to some sense of normalcy until the next injustice is broadcast, until the next inappropriate comment makes headlines, until the next hashtag is tweeted. I thought, as we all have thought, there has to be a way to stop this. There has to be a way we can prevent these tragedies from reoccurring, being explained away, being even remotely acceptable by society. Then, in the midst of putting this event together, George Floyd. I don't mind telling you that I'm exhausted. We are exhausted. It is 2020 and we are still dealing with many unresolved injustices that our parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents face. In many ways, we are still viewed as less than, and although we have allies, I believe there is a need to take control of our own destiny to ensure we get the outcome we need to improve our lives and those of future generations. How do we do that? We have tried both age-old and innovative strategies, and I believe all have their place. However, I also think that there is a formula that society is used to. Tragic event, elected and selected officials protect their own interests, we get outraged, march, and demand justice, investigations conclude, and there is a compromise to sometimes appease, but mostly on the part of wrongdoers to save face and retain their positions. It goes further than hate crimes, unfortunately. Communities receiving a disproportionate share of resources, health epidemics in our communities resulting from stress and a lack of access to fresh fruits and vegetables, trauma from experiencing being fearful of and watching the effects of violence and our indifferences in and towards our communities. I could go on for days. The answer to all of these issues, obtaining directions to the Batcave and developing a strategy that gets us the results we need. I know voting is not the best buzzword nowadays. Why, after all I have stated, would we trust the government, the process? Well, it's the construct we have to work with. It is sometimes, often about understanding the rules and playing them to your advantage. Strategically thinking about how to use the system at hand to obtain the results we need. And that's why we are here. I believe through this conversation, you will not only identify the sentiments of our panelists, but also find some rarely shared nuggets of information that can help us effectively move forward. We particularly have some real interesting information about voting machines, but let's first have a general conversation about the current events. We have panelists today with us here, Kavian Hillman, Kevin Owens, Fred Parham, and Stormy Webster. Welcome to our panel, and thank you so much for your participation. What a time we are in. So first, I want to ask you how you're doing, and I'm going to ask you that, and also any introduction you would like to give us, please feel free to let us know. Kavian, we'll start with you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
How are you doing today?
I'm well. How about yourself?
I am very, very excited about having this very well needed conversation today.
Awesome.
I know we've all been watching the news over the past few days, and we've continued to kind of rack our brains of how can we be a part of the process? How can we be a part of the change? So I'm very, very excited about this conversation, and I hope that we all leave refreshed and ready to take charge of our own destiny.
Thank you. Stormy?
Good evening. Thank you so much for, for putting this much needed conversation together. Very timely in terms of how am I feeling, just in true honesty, not great. I've been texting friends and family. My emotions go from enraged to infuriated to sad, disappointed, and a host of other emotions that I probably can't describe, quite honestly. But seeing the young people, I have to remain hopeful. To see the boards, the organizations, to the social media, the letters that have gone out to employees, I have to remain hopeful, but I also want to see what their next steps will be, because words are cheap, words are easy, but I also want to see what comes next.
Awesome. Kevin Owens. Unmute yourself, Kevin. There you go.
Yes. How you doing? I feel that there's so much going on right now. My emotions are really of positivity, in the sense of we've got to be able to take this opportunity and to really, do what we can to impact young lives. I think that with all the things that are going on, it's very easy to be negative. It's very easy to be upset, angered, all of the things that everybody's talking about. But I just think that I'm trying to hold on to being positive and realizing that, as the young man said earlier, how important it is for us to do our part to try to do something to affect change and to make things better.
Yes.
It's like a watershed moment in America, and we've got to do whatever we can do to make something positive happen from this experience and wrong some of the injustices that have been going on recently.
Thank you. Mr. Parham, how are you doing? Unmute.
Busy as usual, but delighted to be amongst this audience and these esteemed panelists. And I think I can echo the sentiment of everyone's voice who I've heard, that, now is the time. I think our lives exist in cycles. So here we are again with an opportunity to make history.
Yeah.
And, so I really feel empowered. I feel like that, the moment is not bigger than me, but I seek more than anything to coalition build in this time. So I'm eager, to engage in everyone's, whatever you're doing, whether it's raising children as parents, Sunday school teaching, I just want to make sure that we are supporting one another in every way that we can. So I feel great and I'm excited.
Right. I like Stormy. I'm feeling a little bit down. I'll be honest with you. It's been quite a struggle to see everything that's going on the news. We're protesting, being very vigilant. Our young people are really being vigilant. How do we know that this is going to change anything? How do we know we're not going to go back? Is change abound? Anybody can speak on this.
Well, I think change is the only constant. So if we, kind of look at it in that sense, in terms of, the concrete things that we see and live every day, it has to change. And so I heard a CNN commentator mention the other day is that really it's just a matter of which direction we go in that change. We can certainly go to more chaos and unrest, or we can move in a direction of justice and reconciliation. I think, there are some excellent models for us as a country to look at where countries have done it.
What countries?
South Africa specifically.
That's true.
Yeah, being a historian and an educator, South Africa's model is phenomenal.
Okay.
But I mean the reconciliation.
Right.
That they had.
And Aisha, I think you mentioned earlier about the cycle where there is an incident that happens, we get outraged,
Right.
And then we get some words, empty words from politicians, and then it dies down a few months afterward, then we're back to life as normal. And so to answer your question, we have to make sure that it changes. And so as we continue to have a conversation today on what can we do to be a part of that change, and how we can use our vote at the ballot box to be a part of that change, we have to make sure that this is the time that it changes. We cannot let this moment pass us by. And to my panelists who just spoke about it, we have to make sure that we are part of that process.
Well, we have seen, this is a little controversial, but we have seen this type of fervor for change by governments and corporations. Had the protests been nonviolent from the beginning to the end? Honestly.
And I think this is where I'm usually kind of on the fence in terms of the whole, and we definitely don't want to see looting.
Absolutely.
Or we don't want to see our communities impacted because some of the communities that have been impacted are the Black community. So we don't want to burn down the grocery store that's in our community when we already have issues with having food deserts. That may be the only grocery store within 10 miles in that area. However, to your point, I'm on the fence because if we don't have some of the protesting, did the looting really cause this moment to blow up?
Right.
If we had all the peaceful protesters where everyone protested peacefully, would we be at this moment now? And so that's a really good question that I kind of toil with internally back and forth, because I definitely don't want to see any violence or see anyone looting. But I think we have to make sure that our voices are heard and this doesn't become another incident where people forget about what happened and we're back to our normal lives again.
I agree.
Yeah, I think, from my perspective and view of engagement in grassroots organizing over the last 20 years, I can say that, the perspective of where people organize for change doesn't begin with what the government does or a corporation. I think organized people, as we have done before in our previous cycle, they are able to make demands of the government and corporations on what they will and would not accept going on in their communities. And we have models of that across our history in this country.
Mr. Parham, it seems like we just need to be educated on the models.
Yeah, and honestly, yes, ma'am. And honestly, they should be a part of the students' curriculum in the schools.
Absolutely. I agree. How do we get them to be part of the school's curriculums? What do we need to do that?
Well, as an educator, I've served on a couple of charter school boards the Main Street Academy out in College Park for 2 years. And I served on a charter of Tech High School, which was the first tech high school in Georgia back in 2011. And I had the unfortunate pleasure of closing Tech High School because of the then charter school approval structure in Georgia was that the school districts did it. And so there were a lot of things with FTE and technicalities, but so to just shed that light, my experience has been, we can do both, if that makes sense. I think our tradition has it and has provided a good model that we have abandoned, and that is to have the ensured transmission of our culture and the best of us, because every culture has a good and bad part. But to ensure that we do that in the institutions that we control. And those have been our churches that have Saturday schools to help our students in the church who we know are deficient in math. And usually it's a teacher in the church who says, okay, well, I'm going to tutor the kids on Saturday, or we're going to have this ACT thing through that dynamic. And so that is going on, but what's happening is we're stopping short of really reaching out to the young people in some areas because churches are full of adults, but there are far too few children. And I only say churches because they are the institutions that we historically worked out of, and that's not happening now.
Kevin Owens, I know you're an educator.
Yeah, I wanted to chime in, Mr. Parham. I've worked at charter school when I was in Michigan. Since I've been to Georgia, I've worked only in public schools. And I think he said something very deep about us being in control. It's very difficult in the public schools. My specialist degree is in curriculum and instruction, and they really try to navigate what you can teach. And a good, effective teacher, as myself and other people, I'm sure on the panel and across the state of Georgia. We try to put in what we can, but it's very difficult based on us not controlling the curriculum, not having people that look like us enough in those positions of power to make sure that African-American studies and other multicultural kinds of courses should be taught across the board. It's not that way. It's an elective, and many of our students, which is a class such as African-American studies, they would all get that piece and they'd learn about the different rebellions and things that impacted us and brought us here. He brought up South Africa, there's India, there's so many other countries that have rebelled. And the conversation we had earlier about violence and nonviolence, that's a huge part, because most of the successful ones have been nonviolent, but there actually have been some that were successful as being violent. So there's no clear-cut strategy, and that's another issue that we're having now. I don't think we need more leadership. All of us on this panel are leaders.
Yes, sir.
But I think as a community, we need leaders. And I've talked to many of my college, I'm a FAMU, and I've talked to many of my FAMUs, and there's, even with our conversations, there's a divide. Do we as a people need leadership, or should we just be leading ourselves? And I tend to think we need structured, organized leadership.
And Aisha, I think we need to also ask ourselves, how do we get here? Right? So some of the issues that are larger and deeper than just this case. And so if you look at it from an economics perspective, I'm a banker, so I come with a banking background. If you look at the African-American communities, we have lack of healthcare, access to affordable healthcare. If you look at Georgia has the third highest uninsured rate, with a large percentage of that being people who look like me and you. And so if you look at Georgia being one of the 17 states that did not participate in expanding Medicaid, this is one of the reasons why. So when you start to ask yourself, why does your vote count, or what's in it for me? If we were to vote for Stacey Abrams last year, remember, she lost by 50,000 votes. There is over 3 million eligible voters in Georgia who did not vote last year, 3 million. And a large percentage of those are African-Americans who did not vote. So think how things could be different. So ask yourself, for everyone who's watching on this live stream, do you have somebody that you know who does not have health care, who maybe was sick and was scared to go to the doctor because they could not go because they didn't have health care? Ask yourself that question. And if we would have had Stacey Abrams as the governor today, we would be participating in the Affordable Care Act, expanded Medicaid, and over 500,000 people will be insured now. And that number of over 500,000 people, could that be your neighbor down the street?
Right.
Who you know don't have health care? Could it be your grandmother who has type 2 diabetes, who can't afford her insulin? So we have to make sure that we're looking at this from a systemic issue. So these issues didn't just start. There's a pandemic within the pandemic. And these are some systemic issues that we've been dealing with for a long time. Until we deal with the economics of it, healthcare, lack of education, because the studies have shown that in the inner city, we get less funding than some of the other cities, right? Housing, affordable housing, having a living wage. Those are some systemic issues that we have to deal with from a larger, not just criminal justice, because all that is tied together. And people are crying out, they're in survival mode. Over 40 million people have been unemployed because of this pandemic. And most of those look like you and I. So these are systemic issues.
Can I just say something just to piggyback on that? I just read earlier this afternoon, and I don't remember, and that is on me, whether it was the New York Times or the Washington Post, but one of those newspapers put out an article today that said less than half of the African-American adults in this country today are unemployed. That hit me hard. I know that the current resident of 1600 likes to say that he really did a lot to help African Americans in terms of the unemployment rate, and he had the lowest. And you can take that data and do with it as what you will. I personally like to say that it was the previous occupant of 1600 that did most of that. Data is data. I have a math degree, so I know what statistics mean, but whatever. But less than half of African American adults in this country right now have a job. That is huge.
It's huge, absolutely. And to Kavian's point, we have to identify it's complicated, which is why people shy away from it, right? They shy away from the process and trying to figure out what they need to do. It's complicated, which is why we wanted to have this forum, to be quite frank.
Right.
Yeah, I wanted to chime in. You were talking about
Sure,
the
go ahead.
economic piece. And I was just going to say, I know several people that own businesses and were not able to get that money, for example, during that, when they were giving out money previously. So all of the things, I think the number one thing that is hurting us is the education. And of course, which we're going to talk about, I know later on, is the voting piece. And that is so huge because so many of us don't know. And that's just a situation that we've got to change. As an educator, I'm doing my best. And I'm sure everybody else on here that is an educator or people that are in the educational field, we're doing our best, but we got to do more. And we've got to get parent participation. And we've got to do things, as I heard, I believe Mr. Parham say, there's churches, there's other organizations. We all have to collectively educate, especially the younger people, so that they won't have some of the issues that our generation has had prior.
Yeah, and you make a very good point too about the PPP loan. So I'm a commercial banker, and I actually ran the PPP process for my bank. And some of the issues that we saw pre-COVID came up in that PPP system. So we had over $2.5 trillion that was passed in the CARES Act. And out of that, the Payment Protection Program, the first round was about $350 billion. And then the second round was about so we had about $700 billion allocated for the PPP loans. Unfortunately, because how the program was designed, it did not get into the hands of the people who really needed the money. You saw corporations like Shake Shack get $10 million. They had over 40 billion in revenue, but they were actually able to get that money. And then also too, you have some of the Black-owned businesses. They don't really have connection with the bank, and they're already underbanked. Again, these are some systemic issues that are prior to COVID. And so because of that program was actually processed through a bank. So in a lot of banks, not my bank, if you didn't have an account with that bank, you could not apply for the PPP loan. So again, the wealthy, the big companies who had big time accountants, the companies who had attorneys, they were on top of that, and the money ran out in 2 weeks on the first round. So a lot of our Black-owned business, they didn't see a dime of that money, and over 700 billion came through that PPP program to really help small businesses to be able to stay afloat, continue to employ and hire people through the pandemic. However, it did not work because of the way it was designed, and unfortunately, it really shed some light on some of the systemic issues with banking and Black-owned businesses having access to capital via SBA loans, and some of those issues really hit again through the PPP process.
So we already behind the 8 ball because of all the systemic issues, and then comes the looting and the rioting and things that are affecting Black-owned businesses in some areas. So
I just wanted to add, just from again, just a perspective of, so where's the opportunity, right? And then there's 2 questions. Where's the opportunity and what's next? So let's start with where's the opportunity. So the opportunity is we've had 3 months to be shelter in place, or 2 months, and you've had parents and children have to forcibly get reacquainted or send the children to grandma to share and split the time. And so we've seen, within our families, we know all of those cultural dynamics. And so those opportunities have provided some time for the adults to look at themselves and say, hey, I need to get my stuff together. And I'm not talking about college educated people, because most of our people are not college educated. This provided some time for our families to mend and heal. And it's been opportunity in the fact that young people have now, in my venue, they've had time to engage their elders which have been a difficult thing. And I say that language, not mentors, but elders, right? That establishes a cultural connection, it establishes a hierarchy, and it establishes, most important, trust. And I have young men ages 11 through 22 on a call with 100 Black Men of Atlanta, for example. And there are 32 young men on this call right now. And we'll have about 40 or 30 girls on Thursday. And these young people now have time and opportunity to focus on the voices that matter and that impact them.
Yeah.
And so now we're in our homes. And so then from the opportunity, then what's next? Our children don't know any of what Mr. Hillman said. No offense, Mr. Hillman. They don't know the significance of voting. What they do know is that the adults in their lives are struggling. They have questions. They have things that they want to see from the adults in their lives. And no one's given those things voice. Mr. Robinson said he's an educator and former charter school administrator. He knows full well that by the time our children are 13, 14, 15 years old, they are asking serious questions about faith, religion, about sexuality, about careers, or I don't want to go to a college and get a job. I want to start a business. And so we have to make the education match what the children are saying they want and support them, whether they're in the streets or in the classroom. And so the solution then, what's next, and I'll be brief, is that we share resources tonight. We engage one another with great intention and determination. But remember, our children don't know. All they know is hope and what their dreams are. And it's best for us, if we want to continue forward as a race, that we need to know our children's dreams and then help them step to the fore.
Thank you. Kevin, seems like you want to jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, I think another thing he's bringing up is community. And it's, again, we've all said it without saying the word. The parents, they need to be, informed about a lot of things. I mean, it's all of us. What he talked about, the dreams of our kids. In order for us to understand and be able to help them get to their dreams, we've got to kind of know what it would take for them to reach those dreams. And if my child says, I want to be an actress, for example, I have a daughter that wants to be an actress, I've got to be able to guide her in that direction. And the problem, unfortunately, in some of the cases in our community, we don't know how to effectively help our kids. And that's one of the areas that we've got to work at, and we've got to do better job. And this, what we're doing today, hopefully is a catalyst, and other organizations and churches, and we can go on. And it's a constant, we're inundating them with so much information, and we've got to be able to also break it down. I'm sure a lot of people know that. If he would have been talking, Mr. Hillman's very astute and intelligent, but we also have to be able to break it down to him, which I know he can do and other people can do. But that's another thing. And making them realize that it's important, because many of them do not, for whatever reason, do not understand how important it is to know about banking and to know about voting and some of the things that Mr. Parham was referring to, a few minutes ago.
But do we still have the sense of community that we had? I mean, a lot of the stuff that you all are talking about, I got in church.
Right.
I learned that in church. I learned about how to physically write a check in church. I learned about dreams and aspirations in church. I did my first play in church. Not to say that everybody has to have that spirituality or that faith piece, but that sense of community. For me personally, I never had a babysitter, but I went to my grandmother's house. She was my babysitter, and everybody on her block knew who I was. And everybody on that block, if I had the audacity to not do what I was supposed to do, would tell my grandmother what I was doing. Thankfully, I didn't get in trouble, but if I thought about it, I knew better because I was going to get in trouble. But I don't think that young people today, not that I'm that old, have that sense of community that we had. So
But
I
they
think,
do.
but I don't
I
know
would
that
challenge.
all
Go ahead.
the-
I'm sorry.
that we have it like we did.
Well, I would challenge you there simply because young people have created their own community in the absence of this generational, um, for lack of a better expression, breakdown. They've created communities that they call gangs. They've created communities that they call um, sexual orientation communities. They've created other things to replace the value that's absent that the adults who, where it used to be churches going on at the community centers now. All that I remember giving my first public address was in church. It was an Easter speech. And like yourself, I remember Vacation Bible School. So where are those things taking place now? To a far lesser amount, which I agree with you there, they are taking place in community centers, and some good church work is still going on. Mount Vernon, to be specific, over at Ben Mays, we work closely with them with a couple of my civic organizations, and they're making both financial and people contributions. So I think, again, perspective, and we can share and look at either the strengths model, which gives and leaves the strength in the community and looks at the world through its eyes, or we can look at the deficit model. And the deficit model can fill any library in Atlanta. In fact, the Library of Congress, there's enough books written about the deficit model that you could fill the Library of Congress. But you've got about 2 solution seekers. So there are about 25 underfunded Black community-based programs. And when those people apply for grants to fund their program from sources, they are challenged in ways that they need to add, a little color or white folks to it so they can get the grant, or they need to have a PhD. So there are a number of underfunded programs in the community. So our question should be, how do we fund our programs with our own dollars? And Mr. Hillman alluded to our deficit now, but we're just entering that deficit. We've had ample time prior to fund these programs. So the shift in drive, is for Black folk to make a consistent contribution to support our underfunded programs that are community-based, that have good working people who are most of the time underpaid and overworked in these grassroots-based programs. And so that's where I think our strength is to see what is among us right now instead of looking outside.
Okay, I want to switch gears just a minute because we only have so much time.
Aisha? Oh.
Yes. And I want us to talk about mental health in our communities for a moment, especially right now, because we're sheltering in place. We have these protests going on. People have their kids at home. They're homeschooling, putting on multiple hats, and nobody really talks about the fact that we're really stressed and traumatized. We have videos running around. It's almost, I'm gonna say it, murder porn. You know what I mean? It's kind of taking another side. And I want to touch base on, how do we take care of ourselves, and how do we know to take care of ourselves? Have we gotten so used to stress and trauma that we just gonna go through and just figure it out? How do we touch that? It's exhausting. I meant that when I said that. It's exhausting.
I think one way is for each of us on the call to share what's brought us to this point. So I'll begin. One thing that I do with Black Man Lab, which is an organization of professional men that mentor, and I'll share the website because I certainly would love to invite all of you. But we have this part of our meetings that we share with the brothers and the young men, that we say, what are our habits, rituals, and traditions that we do every day? What are our habits and rituals? So in mine, I'm constantly saying I wake up and I envision, my first thought is I envision how I want my day to go before I move. And then second, I focus on my breath to bring me to the moment, especially in times like these. I'm a practicing Buddhist for 19 years. And so each morning I pray just like, in the way of Muslim, but a different prayer. So each morning I get 5 minutes. I commit 5 minutes. Some men who practice the Christian faith, they talk about they do 10 or whatever. But I think that it is the ritualistic aspect of our lives that help us to persevere mentally. And I agree with you 100% that our people are challenged by mental health, and COVID has dumped and compounded that. And so there are efforts that attempt to address it, but I think we can use some of our culture in that Big Mama used to be the voice to go to when mom and them ain't doing it. Now I'm an educator, and I'm sure Mr. Robinson can attest, the teachers carry much of that burden today. And so exercise, just mental, envisioning how your day goes in the very beginning of that day, and then taking breaks. I've learned over the COVID, since I've shifted my whole life and work online, is that I have to have what young people have demanded from companies, work-life balance. And so what better time to master that than while I'm sheltering in place? So that's what my habits and rituals are.
Aisha, I know it's definitely a lot of pressure. I know sometimes as men, we're all macho and we're afraid to say that it's mentally draining.
Right.
And so I know we're watching the news and, every update, CNN, MSNBC. And I know for me, I just can't get the image of that officer kneeling down and putting his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck for 8.5 minutes. And just to think from a mental perspective that my son now is about to be 3, that at some point I have to be able to explain to him when he can understand clearly that he could be profiled just from when he starts to drive a car, to remind him to put his hands at 10 o'clock and 3 o'clock. And if he's ever stopped by the cops, to make sure that he has his hands up. And for him to say, you know what, Dad, why am I different than anybody else? So mentally to kind of think about that over and over again is definitely mentally draining. So really making sure you have a support system, that while we're social distancing, that we're not distant from each other, that you're staying connected to family. I'm from rural Georgia, Ashburn, Georgia. My family, a lot of them are on the call today. And so being rooted in family and faith to make sure that you continue to keep God as the head of your life. And in times when we don't quite understand what's happening, we know to look up to the hills and from which our help comes from. And so those are some important things to think about as we continue to grapple every single day with what's happening and what tomorrow is going to look like. I think it's important to hold on to those things.
Yeah, I think that what he said is, Mr. Hillman said, is so important about God first. That's, we all, I think the meditation, the prayer, that's key. That's an everyday thing, when you wake up, before you go to bed. And I also, again, I always keep coming back to, this is a time, because of some of the things that have happened, where you have to communicate and talk. And I think, again, you probably have more time now than you've had in the past. Talk to your uncle, talk to your aunt. Connect, because connectivity brings power. And that's how I'm staying positive, because it's not just me, it's someone else helping you stay positive. You've got to find others to help you. And as a Black man in America, more than anything, the people that are older than us are wiser than us, and they can calm you and make you realize, this too shall pass and it's going to be a better day. But when you don't know that, and that's why I'm such an advocate for conversation and communication, and we got to talk to our kids. I have one son, no one wants to have that conversation, but we got to figure out a way to make it something where he's going to be okay, and assure him that no matter what, we came from, 1619 is when we came to this country. So 401 years, we came here enslaved, and we are no longer going to be enslaved anymore. And we're going to do what we got to do to make it to where we need to make it to.
Let me just say this really quickly, as the only woman mom on the panel, Kavion, you mentioned your 3-year-old. I have a 4-year-old, and some of you have heard the story that the other day he asked me if police make red choices, because we talk about red and green choices in our house. And I can't take credit for that. That's something he learned from his teachers. I wish I could take credit, because I think it is a wonderful, wonderful method to enforce really good behavior. And when he asked me that, I will be honest, I did not know what to say. And I said, just like you sometimes make red choices, all people sometimes make red choices. And then I went in the bathroom and I just wept for about 5 to 10 minutes. And then after that, I called my mom and I said, we have to just get out of the house for a little bit. And
Yeah.
as much as I have faith and I pray constantly, and yes, I do think it is important to talk. Sometimes you just have to get it out of your system. So sometimes for me, sometimes I can't talk. Sometimes you just have to journal. Sometimes you just have to go outside and physically look to the hills, look to the clouds, whatever you have to do. But sometimes you just have to get it out of your system somehow. So if that's just walking and talking to whatever your higher power is. But I do think during this time, you have to get it out of your system, because if you try to bottle that in, and if my mother is watching this right now, she's thinking that is really rich coming from her, because I am the queen of keeping stuff bottled in. But I do think it is important to get stuff out of your system, particularly right now, because as much as we've talked and the media has talked about George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, we also have to think about, we are still talking about Emmett Till. We've also
Right.
got to talk about Breonna Taylor. We, as a people, are still dealing with a lot. I don't know which of my esteemed panelists talked about 1619. We are still thinking and dealing with a lot. So we've got to come to, we have to deal with all of that. We can't internalize all of that. So talking about mental health, we are dealing with a lot of stuff. So however we have to deal with that, prayer, running, talking, journaling, whatever it is, but whatever we have to do, we got to do it, because we have to, as you were talking about, how do we deal with another day? We got to wake up tomorrow and deal with another day.
Right.
And I'm huge about village. I think village is, everybody who knows me and follows my social media knows that I am a villager. I thank my village. I love the support. I need them. Definitely, I'm a villager. How do you message all that's going on with your kids? How do you do that?
Like Ms. Stormy said, I have a 12 and 13-year-old. My son's 13, my daughter is 12. Their names are Zaki and Nzinga. And so we, like Mr. Robinson alluded to, we have treaded lightly on the conversation of slavery up until the point where they're ready for their rites of passage, or whatever we call it, transition to teenagehood. So they've recently been exposed within literature, and so in my community work, I really try to give parents an idea is that, the eyes can't unsee, but the mind, when young people read or do audiobooks, the imagination, it has its limits. And so in exposing my children to the horrors of slavery through books, The Captive is one by Joyce Hansen, which I recommend to every person listening on this call. The Captive by Joyce Hansen, for elementary age students, fourth and fifth grade. And so to the specific point of how am I talking to my children about it, I'm asking them, one, how they feel. I'm limiting their view of the rioting, and I'm focusing their attention on the good things that are going on in the community. And that's what I'm doing with my kids, constant conversation and focus, censoring.
Okay. We have, anybody else want to chime in? Okay, good. We need to wrap up this segment. I want to go into the voting segment, but I want to ask you all, we unpacked a lot, and I'm a huge talker, love the talking, but I like resolution. I know, Mr. Parham, you have been, I can tell you're very resolution focused. But what are a couple of things, if each of you can give me a couple of things that we as a Black community should be focusing on, and what should we be doing about it? specifics. So like if it's education, what part specifically should we tackle, and who do we need to be going to get something done? Who wants to go first?
I can go first.
Go ahead,
Aisha.
Kevin. Mm-hmm.
And that's a really good question. I think as we all continue to have these conversations, it's going to be about specifics and how do we move forward. And so I think we had a really lively conversation around education. I mentioned healthcare earlier and some of the other economic issues that we have to, systemic issues we have to deal with. And the one thing that connects all those together, right, is funding, capital, and dollars. So in order for our kids to have great education, we have to have equal funding. In order for everyone to have affordable health care, we have to have that opportunity. And so specifically in terms of healthcare, and I know this conversation is about, it's aspirational, but it's also how can we demand our Republican officials with our vote at the ballot box to push the issues that we need. And I think healthcare is a really big one. Healthcare is the number one reason why people go file bankruptcy is healthcare. You go to the hospital, God forbid you have a major issue, you're stuck with a bill for $70,000 to $80,000 and you can't pay for it. So as you're thinking about who I should vote for and what values they should have, I think that's a really big item. Who is having conversations about expanding the Medicaid provision? Because when you talk about mental health, when you talk about all these other issues, it's centered around you being healthy and it's you having access to affordable health care. So I think to me, that's a really big takeaway. I want to make sure that I kind of expand upon with the group is that as you're looking at a very important issue at the ballot box, I think healthcare is a big issue.
Stormy?
I would just say where we spend our dollars and where we invest our dollars. And for me personally, I work at an independent school here in Atlanta, and I have really been concerned about the curriculum and the lack of diversity, just in terms of not just the books our kids read, but just the overall curriculum. As I think it was Kevin who said, a lot of those courses are electives. They should not be electives. Black History Month, Women's History Month, Hispanic History Month, that should not be a month. It should be intertwined in every part of the curriculum, 180 days of the year, but just being more involved in that piece of, that's a little part that I can make my voice heard.
Kevin?
I everything that both of them said, Stormy said, and of course, Mr. Hillman said is great. Everything goes back to me, the word education, and more importantly, the political process. I think that's the key. We've got to get people in office that looks like us, that has our same values, views, and, we have to stop allowing them to continue this cycle, because the economic part is important. But I think a lot of times if you get the political part correct, then you can get the money and you can create programs and laws that make it an even playing field. But unfortunately, the voting piece in America, and this is a systemic problem. Americans don't vote across the board, but in our community, that can't happen, especially in this upcoming election. No one that is able to vote. I remember Mr. Hillman bringing up something, 87,000 people did not vote because they were not able to register in time the 2018 election. These are things that can't happen. As I think he said it or someone said earlier, that could have been a difference in Abrams being in office. And these are just things that we've got to talk to the kids about, being politically active and running. If you've already voted, how many of you saw positions that were unopposed with Republicans? Yeah. It's already over. There's not even a debate. There's not even a discussion. That's a problem.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
And we'll talk about that in the next section.
Yeah, but I'm sorry, but that's the point to me, political process, and we've got to educate people so that they are equipped with the knowledge to do well financially, mentally, all of these things. But when you don't know, you don't know. And we've got to help them.
Mr. Parham. Down
So
to a couple minutes.
sure, thank you. Asa Hilliard wrote a book called Reawakening African Genius. He's a preeminent scholar at Georgia State and founded the Crim Center there. He's since transitioned, but his work is worth reading. He said that there were over 200 schools antebellum where Black folk were teaching Black folk. Antebellum, for those who don't know, means before slavery ended.
Right.
It has been the priority of Black folk, people of African descent, since we arrived. Education has been our central focus. Why should we change that now? Our ancestors knew that they may not get all that they accomplished in their lifetime. So they invested most of their energy and resources in the future. Today, do more of it. I'll give a couple of websites where we are actively engaged in training our young people in doing that work, using our culture as strength. Upson.org is one, stands for Urban Free College Education Network, UPCEN.org. And then the second institution, and girls and young men are welcome in that institution. Then the second institution is the Black Man Lab. That website is blackmanlab.org. I'm sorry, theblackmanlab.org. Before COVID, we were averaging 100 men every Monday, feeding them free of charge to them and putting panelists in front of them who are mending broken relationships within our community through our own strength. And so to the esteemed panelists, thank you so much. I've learned and wrote down quite a bit. And to the listening audience, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. So I'm going to go on into Fenda Hillman's section. She's going to cover the voting section. Thank you, Fenda, for joining me. I'm actually going to bow out gracefully, so enjoy. Fenda, unmute.
I'm sorry. Good evening, everyone. My name is Fenda Hillman, and I am extremely pleased to facilitate the second segment of our discussion this evening. I want to thank my lovely hostess, Aisha Ford, for really taking us through a very, very deep discussion. We covered some heavy topics. We had some difficult conversations, but it's conversations that we had to have. And so I want to take a slightly different approach for the second segment. But before I do that, if you're tuning in, just now tuning in, welcome to what we are discussing this evening, which is earning our vote. And if you would like to view the recording in its entirety, please go ahead and join our YouTube channel or subscribe as a YouTube to our YouTube channel. And then also, if you can, just drop your email in the comment box. And that way we can possibly keep in touch with you or send you a survey to just kind of assess a little bit of your needs, because this may be the first time you're seeing us here, but this won't be the last. As Aisha stated, this was an effort that came together with just girlfriends, just hanging out, sharing our frustrations. And we decided that enough is enough, and that we're not going to let another election season go by without us stepping up to the plate and doing what we can. And so this message is for anyone out there who, just like us, may be thinking that someone else is taking the charge on this or may not want to get too involved. This is a time. Step up. You don't have to be affiliated with any major sponsors. You don't have to have any large organizations as a backing. You as an individual, you are enough. So I just want to encourage anyone out there to just step up and start having these conversations with your family and friends, because it's definitely needed. I have the pleasure of introducing my fabulous, fabulous panelists this evening. So we have Mr. Kevin Holder, Mr. Kevin Robinson, and Mr. Cornelius Ball. Cornelius, I don't see you. Are you there?
Here.
Okay, thank you. Perfect. Thank you. I'm sorry, I was manipulating my screen and I didn't see you there for a moment. So thank you. Well, I just wanted to start the conversation off from a different angle. I know with the first segment, we talked about, some of the items that are going to be on the ballot and what really matters to the Black community. But with this segment, I want to have a conversation more so about civic engagement, how we can hold our elected officials accountable. What are some things that we can do as concerned citizens to help raise awareness and get the word out? and just understanding a little bit more about the voter process. What are some things that are new to voters so that we don't go out to the polls and find any surprises? How to be more prepared as we get out there. I know that right now the community is suffering, whether, people want to admit it or not, we are still very much in the middle of a global pandemic. And as a result, businesses have shut down. People have been laid off. They're at home with their families. And as a matter of fact, shout out to those parents that are at home juggling family and work, because it's not easy. It's very, very stressful. So I tip my hat off to you. But in the midst of all of that, we're hearing about the country reopening, and we're hearing discussions about the state reopening. But one of the things that remains a fact is that during this crisis, during this pandemic, we have lost hundreds of thousands of people. And we all know or have heard of someone who is still fighting for their life in the hospital, trying to recover from this crisis. So our hearts and our prayers remain with those families out there, remain with anyone who was affected in any form or fashion by the COVID or coronavirus. Our hearts remain with you. Our prayers remain with you. And as I said, the fact remains here that with everything going on, we place our lives in the hands of local officials who were responsible for making decisions on our behalf. And the scary thing about it is that some of these local officials, we don't know them. We don't know what their agendas are. We haven't heard from them since they've been elected. So we don't know, or we don't even have the confidence that they are actually acting in our best interest. That is the scary part. And so that's why I wanted to have this conversation today, because, we always see, during the election season, there's so much going on about the Black vote. And so my first question this evening is, what is it about the Black vote? Why is the Black vote so precious during election time? We see the red carpet, rolled out, and you see all kind of demonstrations in the community to, going to churches and all kind of different functions to get the Black voters to come out. But what is it about the Black vote that is so precious? And why is it that there's this ongoing perception that everyone in the country values the Black vote, sometimes even more than the Black community? So I'll open that up to my esteemed panelists, and let's see where we go from there.
First, I'd like to say thank you, Ms. Hillman, for inviting me. I think that for all of us, the reason the Black vote is really important because we control which way things fly. And although we may be the minority, if we're joined to the left or joined to the right, we make the majority. And so I think that's what makes our vote really important. But everybody seems to know that but us. And so we got to find a way to let Black folks know that your vote is more important than what you could even imagine.
Thank you.
Yeah. As an educator, I can't tell you how many times that students have told me that my vote does not count. And that's a major, their process for them. And I think that the vote is so fundamentally important to us bringing about the change that we see that's going on right now. We've got to get people in office that will represent us. And when we look at the 2018 election that just happened in the state of Georgia, we talk about how close it was that Stacey Abrams could have, been victorious, and how if we voted more, if we did a little bit more, we may have been able to push her right over into the winner's circle. So our vote is instrumental because, as the gentleman just said, Mr. Ball, we are the swing votes. In the state of Michigan, that was the case in the 2016 election. And we've got to do all that we can do to ensure that things get better for us, from an economic, political, and of course, social situation.
Why do we feel hopeless? Why do we feel hopeless?
We feel hopeless, I think, in part because oftentimes, as you mentioned earlier, we elect politicians and we place them in office, but unfortunately, it's like we take our eye off the ball. The most important thing about being an engaged citizen is not the vote necessarily, because the vote is the beginning of a process. You vote and then you flip to the accountability switch. which we don't always do. And it's also important to know that the top of the ticket or the presidential election is probably the sexiest thing in elections, but in terms of direct impact to us, who educates our kids, who collects our taxes, who protects our communities, that happens on the local level. So that same fervor that we have to, go and vote for a Barack Obama, we need to have that same fervor in voting for our local sheriff. That same fervor that we had in voting for Barack Obama, we got to have that same fervor when it comes down to who's on our school board, because the critical decisions that affect our communities on a day-to-day basis happen on a local level.
I agree with Mr. Holder. I think the closer on the voting ballot that they are to the bottom, the more closer they are to your pockets and to your front door. Decisions that the president make could be a year before they ever gets to you, but the decision that your city councilman makes may affect you next week. So those elections are really important, and we got to find a way to show the importance of that. I'm an elected official in a small town county, and I'm a school board member. In our county, we're the biggest employer. We have our own police department. So my role is important because we have the most employees, we pay the most amount of money, and we have a police department. So those things, the average person doesn't even look at that. My role as an elected official is in my county as big as it is somewhere else. But we don't see those positions in the same manner that we see the president. But my role can affect you a whole lot easier, a whole lot worse than Donald Trump's can. So we got to make sure that you're putting people in office and holding them accountable. I made a decision a long time ago that I got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And it takes each and every one of you people like on this panel to make me uncomfortable, because you got to hold me accountable. And not on election day, but every day. If you have a problem, pick up the phone, call the people that you voted for. If they don't answer the phone, don't vote for them anymore. It's simple as that. If people are not listening to your concerns and the issues that you have, don't elect them again. And let that be known. Make it public.
And, we're looking at a time right now with this protests everywhere, and people are standing up and saying this is wrong and it's unjust, and that's beautiful. But I think kind of based on what he's saying, we've got to protest, even like you say, when there are people that are in office that are not doing what they're supposed to do. And we've got to get up and say something. We can't, Mr. Holder brought up the piece, the accountability. And also we've got to get people on the ballot. Again, we just had a primary, early voting, and of course it's coming up. That's so important because so many people I know, I've had conversations with people my age that do not know who these specific people are. They don't know who's running for what. They've never heard of them. They haven't researched them. So we've got to also teach people about thinking about how important it is to know, as both of these gentlemen said earlier, you know about Donald Trump, you know about Biden, but do you know about the people that, like, as they said earlier, that really, really affect us? And we need to get people that look like us to run, and, not make it always about money. Even the common man, some of these positions, people that don't have to be of influence or anything like that, they can run. And I don't even think they realize they can run. And we've got to educate, can run and be in any of those positions.
Wow, those are some really, really good points. I wanted to go back on something, Mr. Ball. I'm glad you even brought up what you do, because you are representing rural Georgia. And with most people, if you live in Atlanta, then I'm just going to take a page from the pop culture vernacular. Atlanta hits different when you go outside of the 285 perimeter. It's a whole new world when you kind of go outside of Atlanta and you're going into rural parts of the state, but we're all connected with some of the same issues and challenges. And so what I would like to know, and if you can just kind of share for the group, is just kind of educate us a little bit on some of those, locally held positions and how those positions are so critical to our daily life. Because I think some people, they hear the titles, the mayors, the city council, the county commissions, they hear about the Board of Education, but they really don't know who they are, what they do, and how it directly affects what goes on in their everyday lives. So if you all can just expound on that a little bit.
Good. I'll start with Board of Education, for instance. When the board member makes decisions, that decision can have a lifelong impact on your kids. And so when, let's just say we make a decision about a curriculum, we adopt a curriculum, or we adopt a time schedule. Well, that schedule affects your day-to-day life, because now you got to adjust based off of the decision that we made. And what if that decision wasn't in the best interest of the kid? What if it wasn't in the best interest of the community? It was just in the best interest of the people that voted for it. So that comes to your door the next week. And let's look at city councilmen for a minute, because we're in a time frame where we got police and a lot of going on in the country. So who hires the police chief? The city council. And so who elects the city council? We do. So we have a direct say in who polices our community by who we hire as a city council. And so our voice is important. If that city councilman is voting to continue to hire the same chief that is wrongfully arresting our community, wrongfully policing our community, we're the reason, we're at fault for that, because we keep electing those people that keep rehiring that chief every year. So those positions are really important. And with the county commissioners, that I think the county commissioner's seat is probably the most important seat in a county, and especially in rural Georgia. They control the funds that for developing the community. And then when you develop a community, that's how jobs, that's how industry, that's how those things come into the community. And if your county commissioner is not really persistent on developing your community, it's going to die. And we know that majority of the landowners in America don't look like me and you. So when we talk about developing community, developing towns, that starts at the local level. You can't, the state doesn't just send you money, you have to request it. You got to build programs for it. That comes at the city council, that comes at the board of education, that comes at the county commissioner. If we don't have people in those seats pushing to have their employees to do the work to get those funds, we never get them. We've gotten plenty of grants in our county and neighboring counties that had great intentions, great purposes. But if you don't have people actually administering those grants to do the right things with them, those programs are never successful. And so that also goes back to having someone that's elected that understands what the need is, understands that needing to put someone in place that also understands the need and understands what the objective is. And so I feel and especially in rural Georgia, you're going to find people that know what needs to be done, but don't want to get uncomfortable and get in these positions. I'll take myself. I never saw myself being a politician. I don't even consider myself one now. But it didn't seem like the path I should have took. But the more and more I sat back and I watched how things were going, either it was me, who else was it going to be? And so I think these conversations, we got to pick people that, whether they look like us or not, they have our agenda. What is our agenda? And push our agenda. So that's, I don't know. I got so much to say. I don't want to take up the time, but I got a lot on my chest.
I'll just say, in terms of the accountability piece, accountability goes both ways. It's incumbent upon us to hold the people who we elect and put into office accountable, but we also got to hold ourselves accountable as well, because when election time rolls around and we look at the ballot and we don't know who's who and what they stand for, nobody is going to just pop into our house and just automatically give us the knowledge. And the important thing about that is, if we're just blindly voting for people, if we don't know what they stand for and they get elected and they do things that go counter to our interests, shame on us, because we should have educated ourselves prior to. We need to change the paradigm of how we look at politics. Politics is really like the highest form of a job interview. These people work for us. We are the employers. And in a job, if an employee is not up to par in their performance, what will you do? You will probably likely fire that employee. We can fire these politicians by electing people who can actually perform in the way we want them to perform, or at least cater to our interests. And the other part is, if somebody is running for a re-election, that's their performance review. They say, past this prologue, what you've done previously will pretend to what you will do in the future. So don't run on the platform of, hey, I authored a bunch of bills. Anybody can write a bill. What did you pass? Don't say, I wrote a bunch of resolutions. Anybody can get honored. The important thing is, what did you do? Because what you will hear if you listen to politicians around election time if you listen closely enough, is they give you the try speech. I tried. I tried to get more economic opportunities for this area. I tried to, provide better educational opportunities for your kids. I tried to protect this community better. But, I'm a Star Wars fan, as Yoda is wont to say, do or do not, there is no try. We need to get to a point where it's the doing that matters and not the trying that they often talk about around election time.
Absolutely.
There was a study in 2018 that said that voters are more likely to award representatives than to punish them. We keep re-electing people and get nothing in return. And that's a problem that we can fix. We can fix it easily by getting our own candidate and making sure that we get people out to vote. Otherwise, we're going to keep getting the same people with the same agenda, but no results.
But how do we do that? How do we do that? How do we know that we're doing enough? We go to the rallies, we attend the town hall meetings, we see, the different get out the vote efforts. But how do we know that we're doing enough, especially when we look at some of the voter turnout rates and we see that the numbers are not what we really wanted them to be? So how do we know that we're doing enough? And what are we missing? What's that golden nugget that we're missing there that's causing a disconnect for those voters? What are we missing?
I think there's a disconnect with community. I mean, part of familiarizing yourself and being an engaged citizen is don't just familiarize yourself about the candidates, familiarize yourself about your own community. What are the economic conditions? What's the power structure? What are the demographic trends? These are things that we need to know because they help inform our decisions in terms of who we feel like should be representing us at a given time. I mean, somebody can come along and they can be a great economic mind and it can be perfect for that time. But when the times change, sometimes the leaders need to change as well. And we need to get out of this posture of groupthink and just thinking, just because somebody has been there for a long time and they've held a position, ultimately, the proof in how a politician performs is in their results. For local officials, we can see how they voted. If they voted against our interests, we can see that online. You don't even have to attend the meeting. For state officials, you can watch it online. You don't even have to go down to the Capitol. You can even get the roll call vote to see who voted in the yeas and nays, to see how they voted when it came down to you. Because oftentimes they know that our lives are busy. We're at work. We're raising kids, and we're worried about 1,000 other things other than what they're doing. And unfortunately, they can capitalize on the fact that they operate pretty much in the dark because there's not a lot of attention based on what they do unless there's something really controversial that comes up. There are a lot of decisions that are made for which we need to be engaged because when we aren't, for example, let's take the stand your ground law. Nobody was really focused on stand your ground until it mattered. We could have been engaged on that discussion in the front end, in the subcommittees, talking to our legislators, mobilizing our community, and then making sure that law wasn't passed rather than it affecting one of our own. And then we have to, after the fact, try to figure out how we can combat that law.
Yeah, I think what he's saying is absolutely on point. I think, again, a big piece of this is that there's so many people, I'm coming from the educational piece, they don't know, and they also are not motivated to know. And again, I think these are the conversations. You have to have organizations, you have to have groups, you've got to have churches. People have to talk about it, parents. Because again, we're all, at a certain point, and everybody on this panel is a part of the process, and we're trying to make changes. But it's really incumbent upon us to reach the youth, the people that are coming up, because they're going to be able to be here to make the real effective and long-standing change which is needed in America right now. And we've got to show them the value and the importance. And this also goes back to education and us putting these courses, government is a 9th grade class, but it's only for 9 weeks in the state of Georgia. And there's no, accountability piece in the sense that the kids have to know it. It's almost, in my opinion, looked at as an elective. And we've got to make it 18 weeks, or we've got to make it year long, so that the students know that the political process is everything. And then when they feel that way, parents will feel that way. And as a country, we'll start to look at it as this is the way to effectively change some of the ills and the issues in America.
You know, it's interesting. You bring up a very good topic, the youth. You know, right now we probably have several students that are watching us, our high school students that are just graduating. Congratulations to the class of 2020 for high school students and college students. But in that group of students, you have some new voters. And there's a lot of information floating around, you know, with the digital age of social media. And students don't know where to get their source of information from. And sometimes it gets a little challenging, especially what we're going through right now with a lot of the social justice issues. And people are on social media and they're seeing videos and they're seeing a lot of discussion. And it goes from consulting social media from an educational standpoint to now I'm going more towards being enraged by what I'm seeing in the community, what I'm seeing happening live on social media. So what message can we give out to those students who are watching us this evening, who are really impacted by the videos and things that they have seen as of late, and who may be filled with that kind of rage? How do we get them to channel that in a different way so that they can be those engaged voters that we're looking to raise up?
I would say Alice Walker, she once said that the most common way that people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. And in this moment right now, it's important to harness however we may feel about all that is going on around us and translate it into action. Protesting is an avenue, but another avenue is also to find out who are the people that represent you. One way to find out is if you go to nvp.sos.ga.gov and put in your information, it will tell you who your elected officials are all the way down to the local, state, and local level. Find out who you need to talk to, because there will come a time when there is no more showdowns in front of the CNN Center, when there are no more protests, and in those quiet moments, that's when the changes need to happen. That's when the real conversations need to happen. Because, I mean, right now you hear a lot of politicians who are saying, yeah, something needs to happen. But guess what? You're the people that can make it happen. Don't tell us about, that you're upset about seeing these videos. The conversations that need to be had at this moment, at this time, are what are you proactively doing to ensure that these instances like this are a thing of the past? Because without leaders that are proactive in their thinking, then these are leaders who are reactive. They're waiting on the community to tell them what to do. That's what they're in office for. Because once again, if we fail to engage with our leaders, if we do not go with an agenda, if we are not consistently, not just in a moment of crisis, engaging with our leaders about the issues that affect us on a day-to-day basis, then they will once again, around election time, give you the "I tried" conversation. We're done trying. We have to do things that impact us.
Yeah. Yeah, I just think what he's saying is just right on. I think that, we've got to tell them about, as he said, being proactive, and again, informing them and teaching them and educating them that they can make a difference. They can hold them. He's brought up accountable several times. We have to make them accountable. We have to make them represent us. And if, as he said earlier, if they're not going to represent us, then they've got to go. And another thing that we haven't talked about, but it's important. I know that in education, we've been trying to just galvanize everybody, is the census. Many of our dollars in communities come from the census. Everybody's got to be a part of that process so that every person's counted and money that is allocated to us will go to us. So it's in the census, it's in voting. We've got to do whatever it takes. Social media. I'll say this again and again. We've got to allow them to understand that they can be that change. Many of them never even thought that they could be a politician, as Mr. Ball said earlier. But there's so many politicians, there's so many community activists that are out there that don't know how to get to that point. And we've got to push them there and support them and let them know that they can do it and they can be the change in making this country better than what it is right now.
You know,
ask you.
I
I
see
just
a
wanted
lot
to,
of,
I'm sorry, Mr. Ball, I just wanted to expound on that just a little bit more. Kevin, talk to us a little bit more about the how, because we always hear so much about, what needs to be done and what we should do. But if we could really drill down the how, what are some things that as concerned citizens, whether you're involved in it, whether you're informed, whether you watch the news or not, what are some things that you can do from your small town, from your community to really make a difference?
Again, I've heard people talk about this. You've got to go to the school board. You've got to demand some of these things that need to happen. We've got to go and elect people that are going to, again, I'm going to bring up curriculum. Civics, government classes are not 9-week classes. We have an end of the course test, which determines whether or not these students learn anything. In social studies, that class is not that class. It's U.S. history or economics. We've got to make civics and government a focal point of the curriculum, because that is what's needed. That's how you can affect change, to me, more quickly than anything. And because, again, if the kids see it as a 9-week, 9th grade class, they don't think it's important. And if they don't think it's important and parents don't think it's important, then there's issues. So we've got to get in there. We've got to change the curriculum. We've got to get people on the school board. My specialist degree is in curriculum and instruction. We've got to get more people that really care about education and not just continuing the process to change effectively, bring in new curriculum to make curriculums more culturally aware, and also laws and social change types of situations. They can't be electives. We've got to bring in an education that is inclusive and is broad and really connects with all the things that are most important to us being, being not only conscious and moral and making society better. We got to emphasize that. We've got to get in and change the curriculum. We've got to get people on the school board. We've got to get people in positions of power, mayors and such, to force the change that is needed so that we can educate our kids and that the political process can be at the forefront of how we correct these injustices and wrongs. And we can end some of the disparity in the Black community. Economically, you start with politically and the economic piece comes, because when you got laws that are being changed, then the dollars can start coming, because the people that are making laws can make sure that the people that are the have-nots can get access. And we know, everybody on here knows that the problem is access. Many of them don't know the access or have not been taught how to think for themselves to get to the access. And we got to show them that.
Thank you.
I think 3 very specific things we can do. Number 1 is all of us, we're engaged. So it's one thing for us to be engaged and to know the system and how it works, but we got to have a multiplier effect. We have to educate those around us, not just our family and friends, but our neighbors. We can have those conversations, because those are convenient conversations. We can go next door and do it. Number 2, got to build alliances. In having conversations, we'll find people who are like-minded, just like we are. If you go to the school board and there are other parents that are outraged about an issue, just like you are, those are probably some people you need to connect with, because there'll probably be some issues down the line that you guys can leverage your collective voices on. And then perhaps for me, the most important thing is always push for transparency in government, because decisions are made on a day-to-day basis. They're made in meetings that are inconvenient for citizens to come to, and they don't know what happened. They don't know when it happened. They don't know how it happened. They just know it happened. So constantly push for transparency. And in instances where there is no transparency, just know you are empowered. Make open records requests. I encourage it. The government gets over 1 million open records requests every year. And ask for specific things that just are not of public record. Find out how decisions are made. And a lot of times the documents that are never produced because they're never requested. So we can do that as citizens. And a very easy way to do it, you don't even have to be a lawyer. Go to the Attorney General's website. They have a template with the applicable statute on it to make an open record request. And all you have to do is just fill in the blanks.
That's pretty good.
Hold their feet to the fire. I think Mr. Holder is really saying we gotta hold their feet to the fire.
Absolutely. Mr. Barr, I wanted to bring you back on because you spoke on something earlier, and I know in your position, can you just kind of talk with us a little bit about what's working really good in your community and what are some challenges that you face in trying to, galvanize, get people excited about being a part of the process?
Well, for me, this is my 5th year being elected, and it's new for me. It's still new. It took me a year to really, or 2 years to really understand what my role was. I went from trying to be the superintendent to knowing that my role, that's not my role. And so it's been a learning curve. It's been a learning curve to really understand what my role is. And I think for me is just shutting up and listening. Listening to what the parents have to say, putting my ear to the ground and understand what the students' needs are, what their concerns are, and trying to translate that into terms and words that the rest of the school board members will understand. As we know, when I represent a community that doesn't, when they speak, sometimes people don't necessarily understand exactly what they want, because sometimes our verbiage doesn't match, because we say we want one thing, but it's not really what we're saying. We really want something different. And I think that's where my role comes in, to make sure that whatever our people want, I find a way to translate it so we can get it. And Mr. Robinson, you bring up a very good point a minute ago about the political process, about Black history not being taught in school. And the one thing I've learned is we teach what we're testing on. So that means that we need to go and make sure that we're adding this to the Georgia milestone. So we need to put a committee together to make sure that politics is added to Georgia milestone at every grade level. We need to make sure that African-American studies and Mexican studies, all these things are added to Georgia milestones. And that's a committee that we need to work on, not next week, but maybe this week. And so I think that I got that jotted down here. Conversations just like this is where it really all begins, because I'm one person and there's no way that we can think of everything. So when you have concerns, you got to bring them forward. And I know that went off topic a little bit, Ms. Hillman, but I felt that was important. For me, I think some of the things that are going well in our community, we're starting to hire people that really get the community. And that fixes a lot of things by itself. This past year, I've had the least amount of complaints that I've ever had, because we hired somebody that's from our community, that grew up in our community, that's alumni in our system. We have a new superintendent who has his ear to the ground and understands the community, understands the needs, understands where we actually expect to go. And that's changed. The complaints, that's changed. Yeah, we're always going to have complaints, right? We get that. But the volume of them have changed. And I think that now more than ever, if we stick together, if we come up with a platform, if 5 parents come to me with the same issue, that means that I know there's something going on, because five people aren't saying the exact same thing that they didn't know they all came to me. And so consistency, when you have problems, consistently until you get a result, keep calling, keep emailing. And if they're not emailing you back, they're not calling you back, blast them on social media. I promise you, you'll get a call. It only took one time for me to get blasted, and I made sure I kept calling people back. I'll say it again. We got to make these politicians, including myself, get uncomfortable. And being uncomfortable, change comes. And so I stand firm on that. And to all the young people that's listening right now, not voting is not a protest. That's a surrender. If you don't vote, you have surrendered everything that people have fought for. You have surrendered your voice. And the people dying, that died, still dying. And if you don't vote, I mean, you might as well go ahead and just put your name on the grave, because our time is coming if we don't vote. We got to vote. We got to.
Kevin Holder, you talked a little bit about accountability and really holding those elected officials accountable. And one of the positions that we really didn't touch on much this evening are our judges, and the judges are often looked at as, these powerful individuals. Can you talk to us a little bit about the power of the judges, the types of cases they hear, and what are their limitations, so that we can connect that to people, so people can really understand why it's important to also pay attention to who the judges are.
Well, the important thing in terms of judges is to educate yourself on the classes of court that we have in Georgia. So each class of court has a different jurisdiction. For example, if you're dealing with felonies, you're going to Superior Court. If you're dealing with wills and estates, you're going to probate court. If you're dealing with dispossessories, you're going to magistrate court. If you're dealing with traffic offenses, most of the time it'll probably be split between probate court and state court. But the different level of courts and what the jurisdictions are, because when you have individuals currently who are running for judgeships, it's important to know what their background is. I won't mention the county, but I would just say there are some judges, people who are running as judicial candidates for judge who don't have a background in the class of court that they're running for. And I've watched a lot of these candidate forums to hear them talk about the judgeship that they want to have. And they're speaking out of their depth. They're talking about things for which they don't have jurisdiction. And it's important for us to spot those candidates out, because if we do not, and if we don't stay engaged, then we will find ourselves in front of one of these judges. Because what most people think is, oh, a judge has gone to law school. They know the law. Law school does not educate you on the specific areas of the law. The law is so vast. Even a lot of my judges who are lawyers, some who are not lawyers. There are two classes of court where there are lay judges who don't have any background, where the only qualification is to have a high school diploma, and they can be a judge. You have to know this, because if you have a traffic offense, you go in front of a judge who is one of these judges, not to say that they cannot learn the law, but you need to go into the courtroom knowing what is at stake for you. If you don't, then you can be in a situation where there's a judgment against you that is in error. People have to also know that judges are not superior. Judges have somebody they have to answer to as well. There are judicial canons in the state of Georgia. It's the code of things that judges can and cannot do as a judge. Before you go into a courtroom, make sure you give a glance to the judicial canons. A judge can't talk to you like you're no one. A judge cannot make you dictate to do things that they want you to do in the courtroom in a real ugly way. A judge cannot say certain things to you or ask certain things of you. And if they do, there's a commission called the Judicial Qualifications Commission. In the most egregious circumstances, then in those instances, you will file a complaint with that commission, because once again, back to accountability. Who will hold the judges accountable? You shouldn't have to wait for another election to hold these officials accountable, especially a person who's sitting as a judge.
That's pretty interesting. Thank you for that. Well, let me ask you all, because again, we're in this digital age and there's so much information out there, some misleading, a lot of just misinformation. What are some of your favorite sources that you go to for really good information? What can you share with us?
Well, I honestly go to a little bit of all of them, and I jot some things down, and I go back and I put my brain to work and think about what the truth is out of all the crazy things that I've seen. That has worked for me. I think the data that we have online, we also got to know there's some social engineering behind most of the data, and it's driven to us based off of certain clicks that we make. So we got to make sure that we're actually navigating ourselves to websites and not allowing Facebook and not allowing social media to drive us to media, and we're actually driving ourselves to media. And that almost guarantees a little bit cleaner data than it does if we're allowing social media to drive us to the media. So I always like to be in the driver's seat myself of where I'm going.
Okay.
I would say a good place to start is, once again, nvp.sos.ga.gov. Why am I saying go there? Because people have found themselves in the instances and thinking that they are registered to vote, and they are not. If you go to that website, you can check your voter registration status. In the state of Georgia, we have 7.4 million voters. 6.9 million are classified as active voters. The remaining voters are classified as inactive voters. That means you have either moved or you have not voted recently in your election. Make sure that when you go on there that your status is marked as active. One of the things that I do every year at the beginning of every year is I set it to check my voter registration status. I want to do it before every election. The other thing that that website allows you is to get the calendar for the year of elections that come throughout the year. I put them in my phone because I want to make sure, once again, that prior to the election, I'm going to check my status again because I don't want anything to interfere with me being able to exercise my right to vote.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think you have to vet a lot of the sources that you're going, that you're looking up, and you got to make sure that they're accurate. And you also have to try to even read. I think being an avid reader is important, and trying to find information. NPR, I think, is probably one of the areas that I think that they are a little bit unbiased in comparison to a lot of the other publications. So that's one area I go, but I go to a lot of areas. Like I said, I try to vet my sources, and it's just important to try to gain knowledge and to try to always stay abreast. I love that. I have stuff on my phone right here, calendars. I mean, I agree with them. You're constantly putting things to keep you reminded as to what is going on. And again, this is something, we've got to just as much, I hate to say it like this, but you can see someone on the phone and they're going through their Instagram or their Facebook. Just like you're looking through there and channeling through information, we need to find information just like how we are looking at during our social media portion, and find things that are accurate and are really trying to speak to what it is that we're looking for. And we've got to take that approach. We've got to be just as active when it comes to the political process and judges and all of that stuff as if we are looking at something on Instagram.
Now, what about the voter process? We have all this information, we're empowered with so many tools, but as we're going to the polls, for those who have not yet voted, what are some things that we can expect? Or, what are some things that you can share, some news updates, things that have changed recently that we want to make sure that everyone is aware of, so that we don't go to the polls and are not surprised and discouraged and leave without casting our votes?
Well, I would just say that for the first time in almost 2 decades, Georgia is going through a new voting system. And the scary part about it is Georgia is installing the most number of voting machines in the shortest amount of time ever in US history. 30,000 machines in 2,660 precincts in less than 8 months. So let's look back at this voting system that we have. It's called Dominion voting system. Let's look at Dominion's record from other states for which Dominion has operated in. They've had issues with the ballot printer trays jamming. So if the ballot printer jams as you're voting, when you take your thing out of the voting machine, your vote will not have registered at all. It will have erased your vote, and you will have to go back and vote again. There are repeated ballot scanner jams. When you get your printed ballot and you feed it into that ballot scanner, it will jam on you. There are guidelines in place to address what you will have to do in that instance. You need to make yourself aware about what the elections guidelines are for. If you have a printed ballot and it does not register every candidate who you chose and it says something differently, or in those instances where your ballot scanner is jammed in the machine. And then occasionally the tablet computer for which you vote on, sometimes those fail. And the solution to it is for them to reboot it. 10 to 15 minutes later, it'll come back up online. I say all these things to say is that Georgia is about to go through a capacity issue, because think about the previous election. If you went out and voted, how long did it take you to vote? Now, in this process, we're adding at least 2 additional steps to the voting process. So if you live in Fulton County, if you live in Cobb County, if you live in Gwinnett County, your voting time is going to be increased because the process takes longer. Not to mention the fact that if an individual has submitted an absentee ballot application and they get so impatient that they feel like they just want to go in and vote, when they go in, they have to cancel that ballot the absentee ballot request, and then they can vote. That will also add to the process. And that's been one of the issues that people have been facing in this current primary. So I think it's incumbent on us to know that, yes, we can go and vote on election day, but 180 days prior to any election, we can request an absentee ballot. And for those who recently have been so worried about whether the postage is a poll tax, here is what the U.S. Postal Service has said. They said, you're strongly encouraged to put stamps on your ballots. However, they will not redirect your ballot back to your house or not forward it along to the county election office if there is no postage. And who is going to pay the cost? The Postal Service is going to send the county a bill for your postage. It will not come from you. I'm not telling you don't put postage on there. I'm just letting you know that if you don't put postage on there, the ballot is still going to be accepted by the United States Postal Service.
Wow.
That's good information, man.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Wow. Well, let me ask you all this question. So I know we're telling our voters this time to really, pack their patience. We're telling them to read up before they go to the polls and get information on, who's doing what the voting records are, and all that kind of stuff. And we know that that is extremely important. But again, to those first-time voters, those students who are going to the ballots for the first time, what is something that you can really share with them that would even make them want to participate in the elections this year with everything going on? What is that one piece of advice that you can share with them and their parents who may be listening to us this evening?
Yeah, I mean, as an educator, I would just encourage them. I mean, from a historical perspective, the same spiel that I heard when I was a child and even in 2020 is the fact that someone paved the way for you. People died for you to have this opportunity. And that that in 1619, we came here as slaves, and it's 2020, and we're still dealing with some systemic issues with racism. There's so many ways that we are disadvantaged right now. And how we're going to ever bridge that gap is through the voting. The voting piece is critical. And I would tell them, just as important as it is for you to go out there and to protest the injustice of what happened to George Floyd and all the other, and I'm going to say thousands of people throughout history, tens of thousands of people that have been killed like that. And I'm not talking about 400 years. I'm talking about probably in the last, 40 years, that this is this type of situation that you have to make your voice heard. And they've told me countless times, your vote does not count. And I'll always explain to them that it does. The importance of they are the change. They can get someone in office that will represent them. And again, what is most important to me is that we start getting people that look like us in these positions. I should not go to a primary or general election and see a ballot where there is just only a Democrat or there's only Republicans, positions that are unopposed. There needs to be, he talks earlier about accountability. You can't have accountability if you run for something, you're automatically going to win. There's no accountability piece because it doesn't matter. That has to change. We've got to get people active, and we've got them to be participatory in the political process. It's not a if, it's a must. You have to vote because you can't complain. You can't come back to us and say we're disenfranchised as Black people. They didn't make this way. We didn't do this. You have the opportunity to make a change with your vote. That's important. It's beyond important.
Thank you.
And then we're almost out of time, so we're gonna have to wrap up.
Yep. As we're closing, Kevin or Mr. Ball, would you have anything else that you would like to share? Any final words?
Yeah, I'll just like to say in 2016, our current president thanked Black people for staying away from the voting booth, and that's the reason he's in there. So if you need any other reason to vote, that should be all the reason you need. Look out your window, look on CNN, look at these different media outlets and see what's happening around the world and see what our president is doing. If that's not enough reason to vote, I don't know if there will ever be one.
Thank you. Kevin?
I'll just say, let's put voting in the proper perspective. Voting is the start of something, not the end of something. I equate voting to like going to have a meal. You don't go to a restaurant and order an appetizer and leave. Voting is the same way. You don't just vote and kick your feet up and say, I did my part and let's see what they do to operate in my best interest. We have to make sure that once we do cast our ballot, that, like I said previously, that we make that transition to holding the folks who we put in office as accountable as possible.
Awesome. Well, I would like to thank you all very much for participating in this final segment with me. I really enjoyed our time, and I think the information that you all shared was very rich, and I'm hoping that everyone was taking notes, because I was taking copious notes over here myself, and I'm going to be passing that on to anyone who's interested. But I'm going to turn it back over to Aisha for any closing remarks.
Well, I just wanted to make sure that I promised y'all that you could talk about takeaways. So I just want to make sure that I give you an opportunity to do that. So if anybody has anything that they haven't said that they think that we need to say in here, you can do so now.
Okay, I'll lead off. I'll just say, in terms of what it means to be a engaged citizen in this democratic republic. I'll say the first 3 words of the preamble of the US Constitution, they're often cited because they say, we the people. But the next 8 words are what hold the aspiration of America, as it says, in order to form a more perfect union. That phrase, a more perfect union, is indicative of a posture that is ever changing, progressing, and in that evolution, becoming a nation that's more responsive to the needs of its citizens, all citizens, not just a few. In the 1983 book, American Politics, The Promise of Disharmony, the late political scientist and professor Samuel Huntington wrote, quote, critics say that America is a lie because its reality falls so short of its ideals. They are wrong. America is not a lie. It is a disappointment, because it can be a disappointment only because it is also a hope, end quote. America can only remain a hope if its citizenry give way to apathy and never fully engage, or only vote and feel as though that is the fullest extent of their engagement. Voting is something, but it is not everything. It is one arrow in the quiver of an engaged citizen. America can only fully transition from the hope to a realized ideal if we, through action, see to it that it does. Without that transition, America will continue to be, as it has been for far too many and for far too long, just that, a hope.
Powerful. Thank you. Anyone else?
Aisha,
Yeah.
I can go next.
Okay.
I think for me, my parting words would be action. Be your own advocate, be your own cheerleader, and don't just sit back and let things happen to you. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to go to the local city council meetings. Don't be afraid to do your research to make sure that you're an informed voter. There's 3 types of people: those who make things happen, those who watch things happen, and those who wonder what happened. Which one do you want to be?
Thank you, Kate.
The seeds of injustice have grown to bear fruit that America is starting to choke on. And those seeds were planted a long time ago. But we have opportunity today to start planting some different types of seed. And so I challenge everybody on this panel and everybody watching to start planting seeds that in 30 years from now, we're reaping a harvest that we can be proud of. And so my major takeaway, I'm very proud and thoughtful for the robust conversations we've had here today. I've got a list of things that I need to go back and start working on. So I'm very appreciative of that. So I'm grateful. I'm grateful to be part of it.
Stormy, Kevin, are y'all's minds clear? Or you have something?
No, I was just going to say really quickly, just thinking about the young people who are probably on the streets and on the sidewalks and then the parks right now. And I hope that some of them at least will watch the recorded version of this. And just to echo what some of the other panelists have said, I hope that they take that energy, that effort into action. And I hope that they take that into the voting booths, and not just into the voting booths, but I hope that they will run for office. I hope that they will stay engaged, because it can't just end with, hopefully, I know that this started with, Ahmad and Brianna and George, but I hope that that will continue, not just past November 13th, but I hope that they will go into their voting booths on November 3rd. But I hope that that will go past November 3rd, because things won't change on November 3rd. It has to continue past that. And so I just hope that they will continue to make their voices heard after November 3rd.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd just like to say one of the quotes that I have, as a person that I just hold dear to me is, education is a passport to the future, for tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it today. And that's by Malcolm X. That changed my life, hearing that statement. And I think it is just incumbent upon us in all areas that we are, on this panel. We all come from different backgrounds and different situations. I'm from the Washington, D.C. area. No matter where you come from, where you are, we are all inexplicably linked. African Americans, we came here from 1619, it's 2020. Our ancestors came here in 1619. So it is just, I look at it like this: what is our legacy? We want to leave a legacy. People came here, they suffered, and before I leave this earth, besides my children, I want to leave a legacy that I try to make it better, not only for African Americans, but just for people as a whole. Educate yourself, get out and vote. And I love what Mr. Holder said: make everybody accountable. Keep going, keep grinding, don't stop, because we have to do our part. We shouldn't, especially in this times that we're in right now, we should not be able to sleep well unless we know that we've done everything in our power to make the change that is needed. And everybody needs to know, whether they are, 4 years old to 100 years old, that they can do something to be that change to make this a better place.
Thank you. And Mr. Parham had to leave, but I want to thank Mr. Parham, thank all of the information that we got was awesome. Really, really, really awesome. I mean, I'm actually taken aback, and like Mr. Ball said, I had to write down some things and probably rewatch this just to get all of the information that you all offered. So I appreciate that. It's our first one. It was great to have such an esteemed panel and for you to take out so much time out of your day. So thank you. And I just wanted to give a shout out. I will be remiss, because our team is a little bit larger than the three of us. Ayanna Campbell, Tanya Jenkins, and lovely Danielle Lewis. So thank you all for helping me make this come to life. We have so many wonderful quotes to send this back out and make sure that people watch the recorded version, because I don't want people to forget or miss this information. So we will definitely be putting this back out there so that people can watch. So thank you very much.